Good morning, everyone, and welcome. So today we have a very good program for you. We hope that you all can draw a lot out of it, and we actually want it to be fairly interactive. So throughout this session, you were given a note card, and that's for you to be able to write down a question at the kind of concluding section of this program. There'll be a time for questions that you can submit during our discussion section as well. So let me introduce myself. My name is Frank Yip. I'm a faculty in the Department of Math and Science here, and I'm also on the Executive Council, Executive Committee of the Unity Council. And so on your program, and as well as in your welcome bags when you guys first arrived, you got a card that kind of explains a bit about the Unity Council. I wanted to just I was thinking of a way to summarize it. And kind of the mission of the Unity Council is so that you as an individual feel welcome here, and we as a group of people provide it so that others feel welcome as well. And that's kind of like my bare bones summary about what the Unity Council is for. And we encourage as much student participation as possible. So if you think that you can contribute to that and you agree with that mission, we would love to have you. We are always looking for student activists and helpers and people who just want to contribute in any way that you would like to. So our website is available. Also from the CSUM website, you can just search Unity Council and get more information. Feel free to ask any of us. You'll see our pictures on that website if you want any information from here on out. How are y'all doing today? Good? All right. Well, it's always wonderful to see new classes come in. And from what I understand, you all come from different places. So kind of as an exercise to get you a little bit more comfortable and things like that, I'd like for you to register by way of applause or perhaps, a primal scream if you like. Where you come from. So I'll name a place, and if you're from it or if you identify with it, please go ahead and just register in a way that we can hear you. How many of you are from the Bay Area? How about Northern California at large? All right. How about Southern California? How about the Pacific Western states, Washington and Oregon? Delaware? No? Okay. I admit, Delaware was a long shot. Okay, we're just trying it. How about Alaska or Hawaii? How about internationally? Do we have any international students? Woo! All right. Yeah. Okay. How about other parts of the United States that I didn't name in this list? Yeah? All right. You all come from a variety of places, but what joins you now is that you're residents of Vallejo. And so that is a unifying thing. And that's something that kind of defines our character. And I think in yesterday's discussion sections over reading the book, you probably touched on these themes of what it means to have communities, especially cultures, come in together and intermingle, and the degree to which that actually happens. So we actually have some honored guests from the city of Vallejo and city representatives who are tasked with improving the quality of life and making it so that Vallejo is a great place to live. And I am a Vallejo resident, so I very much enjoy meeting them. But today we're actually going to receive brief remarks from the mayor of Vallejo, Bob Sampayan. So I have a brief biography of him. Mayor Bob Sampayan enjoyed a 34-year career in public safety. During his tenure in Vallejo, Bob served as a patrol officer, field training officer, and other positions, including sergeant. In 2011, he was elected into the Vallejo City Council, and he is currently in his first year as the mayor of Vallejo. So would you please join me in welcoming to the stage Mayor Bob Sampayan.
Thank you so very much.
You're very welcome. Do you want it here?
Yeah.
It's on now.
Great, thank you. Intros like that just kind of, I look around and I wonder, okay, who are they talking about? Really? So before we get started, I want to introduce Council Member Rosanna Verder-Aliga. Roz, would you stand up and give everybody a wave, please? She's on the dais with me, a very active member of the community, and her husband, Colonel Nestor Aliga. There we go. And from Congressman Thompson's office, Senior Field Representative Mel Orpila. And before Mel says something, I'm going to say it first. Yes, Mel, I can see over the top of this podium. So, welcome class of 2021. I am honored, absolutely honored to stand before you to welcome you not only to CMA, but to the city of Vallejo. You know, I was listening to the applause and, quote, primal screams as you folks were saying from where you're from. You are from all over the country, and that's phenomenal. Councilmember Verder-Aliga said it was something around 20% of you folks are from the western region. Wow, this is cool. And coming to Vallejo is really an exciting thing for us. We are one of the most diverse communities in the entire nation. And right now, about 25% of our community is composed of Filipino Americans. I'm the first Filipino American mayor of this community. And I'm proud to say that that is an exciting time for us in this town. Our diversity is huge. Hispanic, African American, the LGBTQ community, and it goes on and on and on. We have a huge Muslim community. We have different religions represented throughout our community, and we are diverse and inclusive in who we are, and I'm proud of that diversity. And as I look out on the sea of faces, I see diversity because you folks are the ones that are going to be our future leaders of our community, but more importantly, of the industry. And I'm so proud of the class of 2021. I see the stanchions out there of the different flags that are represented. Yeah, our flag bearers, thank you so much for doing that. Filipinos came to America, well, let me say this. Filipinos came to the Vallejo area primarily during the early part of the 30s. And a lot of it was because of Mare Island Naval Shipyard. My dad came to Vallejo in the early 30s also because of Mare Island Shipyard to work in the industry. He was a student at Cal Berkeley. Yeah, I know, I get it. And he was in the graduating class of 1935, majored in engineering. But his roots were here, working at Mare Island. He worked on the submarine Pampanito. He did wiring and electrical work, and he, like I, being shorter in stature, was able to crawl into those little tiny places to do the wiring. That submarine is currently an exhibit over in San Francisco, and before he passed, I took him on a tour of that submarine, and he was showing me all the little places he had to get into. And I was just absolutely amazed by how he had to contort himself to get into these little places. But that was true of a lot of the Filipino families. During and after World War II, Filipinos came to this town. They stayed. And they married. And they raised their families. But sadly, there was a lot of discrimination during those times. And Filipinos weren't allowed to buy houses, as well as African Americans, as well as Hispanics. But ultimately, in the late 50s, early 60s, Filipinos began to buy property. And they moved into the northwestern side of the community, the southern part of Vallejo, and now we're all over Vallejo. And what I've seen over the years is that Filipinos have become business owners. They've become lawyers, doctors, dentists, police officers. And we are now one of the largest voting blocks in Vallejo, which is absolutely amazing that we have a minority group that has this strong voice to say how our community is going to be formed. Let me touch very quickly on CMA. CMA has been a city partner for a lot of years. And when I first came here back in the very early 80s, I had no idea that it even existed. But as I learned about CMA, I found that it is one of the largest maritime academies in the nation, one of the most prestigious. You folks need to give yourselves a hand for that, because it is you that is bringing this recognition to the city of Vallejo. There are many students that are hosted by Vallejo families, and I've seen that time and time again. I've written letters for folks that I know that have wanted to be host families, to work with you as young cadets. And it is truly an honor to have you here. You young people are doing a lot for our community. You work in many civic organizations. You become involved in social events, community cleanups. CMA folks have worked with the homeless. You've mentored our youth. You are out in our community being a part of the community, not just being students. And I have to thank you so very, very much for that. And I'm absolutely proud of what you, as young people, are doing in our community. So thank you. One of the things that has really excited me is that I have seen graduates from the academy move into different roles throughout the maritime industry. And I want to talk about two very, very quickly. Just recently, the Polar Star, which is the largest Coast Guard icebreaker, was brought to Mare Island to do some refurbishing. I had the honor and the pleasure of meeting their executive staff. But what really excited me was to talk to two people, the executive officer and another officer who introduced us to the entire executive staff of the boat. Not only are they women, but they are CMA grads. And that was so impressive. That was impressive. The executive officer of the boat is a female. The other one is going to soon be finishing flight school with the Coast Guard and piloting probably one of the 37s or the 57s, and I believe it was a 37 that landed here just recently. That is just amazing to me. And to see that as a CMA grad was just phenomenal. So I expect that from all of you. I expect to see you folks out there in that industry. You know, I've been talking to several of the cadets, and there's one young lady in particular who came here at 50 years of age, just got done teaching in Vietnam, and will be graduating. And that's Cadet Buford. Are you here in the audience, Cadet? There you are. She's back there. She's graduating. She's moving on. But she was told that, hey, your chances aren't too good. You're a woman. You're, and forgive me, you're too old. And you're African American. Look where she's going. Look what she's doing. And that should be an example to all of you, because that's what it's all about. And just very, very quickly, as a first-generation Filipino, I am absolutely proud of my heritage. It was a struggle for any first-generation anybody coming to this country. Yes, I was born here. However, my parents were not. They were born in the Philippines. My dad came here in the late 20s, pursuing an education. And listening to his story as an immigrant arriving in a strange place, he was baffled. He was concerned. There was a story that he told my brother and me, about his first week in America. He arrived in San Francisco on a boat back in the late 20s. And his first night in America was spent on a lawn. He had wandered around in darkness trying to find a place to stay. He woke up the next morning and found he was in a cemetery. So, welcome to America. Over the years, he pursued an education, and I'm proud to say that class of 35 at Cal in engineering, he went on, enlisted in the U.S. military, and retired as an officer. That is just phenomenal. But that is an example that I followed as a young man growing up. I look back at what he did, the sacrifices he and my mother made so that they could advance themselves in a new culture. And for a lot of you that are sitting out here in this audience, you are too in a new culture. You're advancing your education, you're moving yourselves forward, and many of you are going to go on to become leaders in this industry. This industry is huge. And to see the many faces that I see out there, it's exciting for me to say that you are going to be our future leaders. That is what absolutely has me excited. I'm proud of all of you. I welcome you. I'm thankful for all of you. I'm thankful for this university. And to the class of 21, thank you for this honor and this opportunity to come before you and address you. And I'm absolutely excited to be here in 2021 to cheer you on, to say, hey, I watched a lot of you grow up. And now you're moving on to something exciting, such as Cadet Buford is doing. And again, thank you for this opportunity. Good luck. Welcome to Vallejo, and enjoy your education. Thank you very much.
So thank you again, Mayor Sampayan, for sharing your story, your background, and for reminding us that we are a part of Vallejo, and Vallejo is a part of us as well. So now we're going to introduce our featured speaker for today. Dr. Anthony Ocampo is a scholar and writer who focuses on issues of immigration, race and ethnicity, gender and sexuality. He's the author of Latinos of Asia, How Filipino Americans Break the Rules of Race. His book examines the racial lives of Filipino Americans who trace their roots to the society in Asia, but also share many cultural characteristics with Latinos. Currently, Dr. Ocampo is working on a second book, To Be Brown and Gay in LA, which chronicles the way gay men of color from immigrant families negotiate race, gender, and sexuality within their families, neighborhoods, schools, and mainstream LGBT spaces. Dr. Ocampo has co-edited 2 major collections in race and ethnic studies and has been featured as a commentator for local and national news outlets, including CNN 60 Minutes and the San Francisco Chronicle. Dr. Ocampo is a Ford Foundation postdoctoral fellow at the School of Public Policy at UC Riverside, and he is an assistant professor of sociology at Cal Poly Pomona. At Cal Poly, he has been the recipient of the Provost Teacher Scholar Award and an Outstanding Teacher Award. Dr. Ocampo is a graduate of Stanford University, holding Bachelor of Arts and Master of Arts degrees, and the University of California, Los Angeles, holding another Master of Arts and his PhD in 2011. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Anthony Ocampo.
Hi. Wait, let's see. I turned it off when I went to use the restroom, so. Yeah. Let me just do the obligatory, my mom's always like, let's take a picture of what you're doing today so I know what you do for a living. Anyway, I just want to say thank you very much for inviting me to spend time with you on this very, very hectic week that is the first year of college, right? It is day what? Day 3. I was talking to someone in the audience. This is day 3. Your days have been bombarded with a lot of programs, information. I hear that you have more talks coming up. And my first reaction was, you're not going to remember any of this. But my hope is that this week's going to plant a lot of seeds, right? It's going to plant a lot of seeds in terms of what you're experiencing here, who you're becoming friends with, and it's going to be something that, I mean, even for me, when I think back to my college experience, is one of the most impactful experiences of my life. I've been in a couple weddings for my college friends. I've seen their kids being born. And so I see college as this really formative time to explore who you are and build the world and friendships that you want. So again, thank you for being here. Professor Yip, you jacked some of my intro tactics. I was going to do this, my quick list of cities for shout outs, but real quick again, just want to get a sense of who's in the audience. We got Northern California again. Where are you at? I'm from LA. So who's from LA? San Diego. So who of all this, who's the largest crew over here in terms of home cities? LA? Southern California. You know what we missed? We missed Central Valley. Who's from the Central Valley? Awesome. I like that question of where are people from? But I want you to think about where you're from because in a lot of ways it shapes who you are today. But I also want you to think about this as kind of like your square one of a journey for where you want to be tomorrow. Like the mayor. Thank you, Mayor, for coming. It's kind of cool that y'all got the mayor coming here. My parents are immigrants. They migrated here in 1980. They got married in 1981, and 8 months later, I was born in September. 8 months, not 9 months. 8 months later, I was born in 1981. So you can probably guess as to why they got married at a certain point that year. But so yeah, I grew up most of my life here, but in a lot of ways, their experience as immigrants has really shaped the way I look at the world. In a lot of my life, there have been moments where I've had to leave my comfort zone, right? There's a lot of times in my life where I had to move away or distance myself from family and friends to explore new adventures. There are a lot of times when I was in this new place, and I was like, what the heck am I doing here? I don't really know if I belong here. And those are a lot of the same experiences that immigrants are facing today. So in order for me to feel a little bit less awkward about being in a new place here at Cal Maritime, I decided to go on this lovely thing called Google and learn a little bit about campus. Talk to some of your classmates, and I learned there's a couple of other shout outs that I could do. Who is here from DEC? Engine? DEC, how you gonna let them play like that? DEC, let's do DEC again. There we go, okay. All right, engine. All right. And finally, last but not least, MPM. Goosebumps, man, y'all are giving me goosebumps. So thanks, Lydia. That worked out. Where's Lydia? Thank you. And then, of course, I wanted to learn more. There's like really interesting YouTube videos of Cal Maritime floating around. You should, like things Cal Maritime students say, right? Check it out. It's funny. But in I was reading this random newspaper called the New York Times. And, Cal Maritime is this place that really has this huge impact on people's lives, right? Folks that graduate here end up becoming part of the top 80th percent of the income bracket in society, right? So this is a place where no matter where you came from, whether your family was from a low-income neighborhood, whether you came from a well-off neighborhood, this is a school that takes folks from low-income backgrounds and somehow magically through these 4, 5, 6, maybe 7 years, whatever. How long do people take? Like 4 or 5, good, okay. 4 years, right? Somehow you acquire the skills, you acquire like the knowledge, and most importantly, you acquire the character that allows you to elevate to a certain place in society where you can, not only, be rich, but also like have this positive, like have the resources to influence society in a great way. And that's a tremendous amount of privilege and responsibility, right? And then finally, this was kind of funny. Cal Maritime is also the student body where you're most likely, any guesses on the last one? No? Get a job, not get a, oh, that's there, but this is not what I got in this paper. Huh? Be on a ship. That was not on the survey. Most likely to get married. So apparently 60% of you will somehow find yourself married, and so that's cool, right? Huh? Wow. Okay, 40% of you, do not worry. 40% of the room, everything will be all good. There's absolutely nothing wrong. I'm not married. Life's good, you know? Like it's anyway, so I want to talk about, real quick, I feel lucky because you gave me like I have till 10:10, so I'm going to do my best to not, I know you had a lot of stuff, so I'm going to do my best to not bore you, and my easiest way of not boring you is to tell you a lot of stories, because, you know, I could lay down a lot of facts and figures and information, but if I tell you stories, you might actually somehow remember me for the next day or two, and that's all I really want. So my story is I grew up in a city or a neighborhood that's very much like Vallejo. So I grew up in Northeast Los Angeles. Anyone from there? Eagle Rock. Eagle Rock. You. What's your name? Paloma. Eagle Rock. It's like the best. Glassell Park, Highland Park. You know what I'm talking about, right? Okay, so me and Paloma go way back, right? And I grew up in this neighborhood, as Paloma can tell you. Go find her later. This neighborhood's incredibly diverse, very much like this room right here. I grew up in a school where most of my classmates were either Filipino or Latino, right? We grew up in the same apartment buildings, the same blocks. We went to the same churches. We would go to the same mall to go kick it and do, you know, we bought our first pagers together. You remember pagers? No. Okay, there were no cell phones back then. So we have a lot of memories growing up with Filipinos and Latinos kind of hand in hand, right? And for a lot of us, our parents were immigrants, whether it was immigrants from the Philippines, immigrants from Mexico. And so that was my experience. And then, you know, Eagle Rock, FYI, is a neighborhood where, like Vallejo, is about 20-some% Filipino American. So I went from a neighborhood that was 20% Filipino American, and then I went to college up in the Bay at Stanford, where there were literally 20 Filipinos in the entire freshman class, right? And I know that I'm going to talk a lot about Filipinos today, but this is not so that you can be like, oh, I know all this stuff about Filipinos and I could play like trivia night or something, right? It's more for like, my feeling is that there's a lot that can be learned from looking at the Filipino-American experience. I teach at Cal Poly Pomona. It's also a Cal State University school. Most of my students are not Filipino, and so when I ask them, you know, and I kind of should do this survey here. How many of you grew up in neighborhoods where there were Filipinos? Oh, wow. Or let's reverse it. I grew up in a neighborhood where there were no Filipinos, right? How many of you remember in kindergarten through 8th grade to 12th grade, I guess now, ever reading anything about Filipinos? Wow, that's pretty good. That's way more than my students at Cal Poly. How about this? How many of you ever watched or seen Filipinos on TV? For real? Wait, what are you watching? What channel are you watching? Huh? Oh yeah, okay. So let me just tell you that when I do this survey in my class, there's like one hand that goes up, right? And so I asked them, okay, since you don't have that much info about Filipinos, you know, I asked them to do this anonymously so they don't feel bad. And I say, what are some stereotypes that you've heard? Who are what do you know about Filipinos? And these are the kind of answers I get. The guy from La Bamba, they're too young to remember that movie. Huh? Lou Diamond Phillips, Manny Pacquiao. Okay, all right. Or Bruno Mars. Some people forget that Bruno Mars is half Puerto Rican, half Filipino. So anyway, my point in telling you all this is that I went to a school where folks weren't, unlike this crowd over here, folks were very unaware of what not just the Filipino experience was like, but what immigrant experiences were like. And why that matters is because when I moved into my college dorm and people were talking about, oh, how did you spend the summer? What did you talk about with your parents? The type of stuff that I was saying was very different from the stuff that they were saying. So they were talking about things like, oh, I went on a ski trip, right? I never even seen snow at that point. I went to Europe, these things that were really outside of my worldview. And I would say things like, well, we have like 12 people living in our house, right? And it's really fun because it's like no one has their own room and everyone gets each other's space and it's a lot of drama. But it was like, that was my story. But because no one else had that story, when I got to college, I became very much afraid to talk about my perspectives, not just with my classmates, but in the classroom. I became very afraid to talk about this. And college was my time to kind of engage in all this exploration about who I was, the history of where my community came from. And I want to share a little bit about that today so that you don't got to buy the book. No, I'm kidding. So I want to share a little bit about that today because what I found is that in telling my story, it's ignited this fire and it's triggered my own students, even if they didn't come from the same background, to start talking about their stories. And the reason that stories matter is because when you hear other people's stories, it makes your world a little bit more complicated. It becomes a lot more difficult to hold on to those stereotypes that you may have adopted from television, from growing up the neighborhood you're from, and that's a good thing. Being able to see the world as a little less black and white and a little bit more gray, that's the best thing that can happen to you in college. So anyway, this is a picture of the book, right? And what I do whenever I give these talks is that I'm not always in Vallejo when I'm giving talks. Sometimes I'll be like in Wisconsin or like, where else have I been? Ohio, Pennsylvania, folks where, like places where they literally not just have not heard anything about Filipinos, probably never seen one before. I might be the first one that they've seen. And so just some background info. Let me turn this on. What do you know? There's 3.5 million Filipino Americans in the United States. How many people knew that? Oh, no. You did. Awesome. Okay. 3.5 million. A lot are in California, but in California, Filipino Americans are actually the largest Asian American group in the state. And again, that's something people don't know. In the country, Filipinos are the second largest Asian American. But what's funny is when you hear the term Asian American, right, you kind of forget Filipinos. You don't always think about the brown kid whose last name is Rodriguez that has like a Catholic necklace around their neck, right? So there are these stereotypes about Asian Americans that don't necessarily fit with the Filipino American experience. And that does something to the way people experience life. If people don't see you as belonging to a group, it can get a little weird, right? Here's a picture of a lot of alcohol. There's a point to this, okay? And one of my experiences that I love telling is this moment when I was in college and I was broke. And I saw, you have flyers all over campus, right? So at UCLA, there were all these flyers that had these quick money-making schemes. And one of them said, alcohol study, right? Do you drink alcohol? I don't know, can I talk about this? Is that okay? Okay, so I was 21. Yes, I drink alcohol, senior year, or as my last year of school. And are you Asian American? Yes. So people that qualify would be eligible to make $200, and all you had to do was drink alcohol and be Asian. That's pretty straightforward. I know some of you might not believe me, so here's the actual flyer from that day. I ripped it off because I was like, I don't want anyone else to get the $200. This is my $200. So I called I called the study coordinator. I made an appointment. I said, I'm available all week. I just really need this $200. And everything was going fine until I had mentioned on the phone that I'm Filipino. And she said, oh, I'm sorry, but you don't qualify for the study because Asian means Chinese, Japanese, and Korean. And I was, first of all, I was like, shoot, I don't get the free alcohol and the $200. But it was a moment because I was like, here was this person telling me who I was and telling me who I was not, and it really made me mad, right? It also made me mad because, has anyone ever taken sociology before? Wow, awesome. I didn't even hear about sociology when I was your age, so that's great. In sociology, we learned that racial identity, it's not a genetic construct, because I asked her, like, why Japanese, Koreans, and Chinese? And she said, we need a genetically similar sample, which any scientist will tell you is kind of a bogus thing to say. So we learned that race is not a genetic construct, it's a social construct, and so, and there was no reason why I shouldn't be part of this study. In fact, anyone that knows Asian American history knows that the term Asian American didn't actually exist until around the 1960s civil rights movement, when Filipinos, Chinese, and Japanese got together and said, hey, we need to like bond, what should we call ourselves? And they're like, Asian American, right? So we've been there from the get. And what I found is that these kind of experiences happen a lot. Any Filipinos in the room? How many Filipinos in here have ever had moments where people didn't think you were Asian? Raise your hand. Crazy, right? Crazy. It's a crazy thing when the largest Asian American group in the everyday lives are told, you're not Asian, right? So my question that I wrote about in the book is this, you know, it kind of looks silly, but I was serious. I was like, are Filipino Americans really Asian? I wanted to think about this a little bit more deeply because it had implications, not just for whether Filipinos can participate in an alcohol study, right? But whether Filipinos would be part of Asian American programs, educational groups, political groups, etc. So what researchers have done is sometimes you get those surveys and they just straight up ask you, like, what's your racial background? How many of you have taken that before? You know, when you like register to vote, get a license, when you apply to school. So here's a funny thing. When they ask Filipinos, what's your racial background? When they ask different Asian American groups in LA, Southern California, what is your racial background? This is what they say. 95% of Chinese, Vietnamese, and Koreans, they pick the Asian box. Any guesses for what percentage of Filipinos do it? Huh? 45%, less than half of Filipinos pick Asian. So why does this matter? It matters because identity is just not about checking a box in a form. Identity, it plays out into your everyday experiences as well. And what I learned is that, yes, there are moments in which Filipinos feel excluded from this Asian American box, but, you know, sometimes you can take a negative and try to find the positive. I'm sure we've all been in a situation where a negative experience has happened and it's turned into a positive, right? How many of you can relate to that? You know, you get dumped and all of a sudden you're sad, but then you make all these cool new friends later and you meet someone better, right? Or your family's moving to a new town, you lose all your friends, but then you make all these great ones. All of your high school homies went to some other college, but you know what? You're here now, right? Anyway, so for me, I want to think, okay, this looks negative, but how can we turn this into a positive? And so I started to read, I started to learn, I started to talk to people from different neighborhoods about what's going on. And what I realized is that with Filipinos, there's this thing in the background going on called colonialism, right? For those that don't know, the Philippines was colonized for 300 years by Spain. Actually longer than the period that Spain colonized Mexico. A lot of people don't know that. So Philippines is kind of like this quirky Latin American society over in the Philippines. So 300 years of Spanish colonialism, and after that 50 years of American colonialism. And why this stuff matters is because it left these cultural residuals. Residuals is just like leftover stuff, right? Residuals, so when you look at the Philippines, most people are Catholic. When you look at Filipino languages, right? a lot of the words sound like Spanish. So these are zapatos, pantalones, camiseta. What am I missing? If I was wearing a skirt, I wouldn't be wearing a skirt, but, huh? Longanisa, sausage, of all the words, right? Sausage, longanisa, church, huh? Oh, no. Others? Mesa, what's mesa? Table. Lechuga, I don't think, that's lettuce, right? This is really funny, but I feel like there's no lettuce in the Philippines. It's like a weird thing to say. There's not a lot of lettuce there. Huh? Wait, what? There is lettuce in the Philippines. Okay, all right. But yeah, you get my point. Ice is yellow, right? So there's all these everyday words. Filipinos tend to have Spanish last names. Lopez, Rodriguez, Gomez, Santos. And so why this stuff matters is because we use these cultural markers. This is the way we use these cultural markers to categorize other people by race. So if I met someone, they're applying for a job, or I saw that their last name was Lopez, what would be your first assumption? Hispanic, Latino, If I saw that someone had a last name like Chang, I might think Chinese American. If I hear the last name O'Neill, Irish, right? So these things matter because they affect, when you figure out, when you do this thing of categorizing other people by race, it then affects the way you interact with them, right? This is the beautiful thing about sociology, is that we have to acknowledge the fact that when you see people a certain way, you develop, this normal for us to categorize people. You develop these preconceived notions that affect the way you interact with them. So and this is not just with race, this is in all things in life. So because I'm standing on this stage, you're not treating me like a homie, right? Because you're listening to me. Because the role that I'm playing is up here as kind of like a teacher, The particular shorts you're wearing and the polo shirt you're wearing, that tells me that you're a first-year student. If I see someone wearing all beige from head to toe, that tells me they're an upperclassman, right? So it's all things where we categorize folks. And the key is, when we categorize folks, we just need the ability to not hold on to those things so rigidly, right? Okay, anyway. So Filipinos, people sometimes, when I was talking to people, why do you feel not Asian? People were like, oh, well, Filipinos are kind of like the Mexicans of Asia. Has anyone ever heard this kind of jokingly? Yeah. Filipinos are like the Mexicans of Asia. When I interviewed people and talked to them, this is what the type of stuff they'd say. And so I realized a lot of this stuff was based on these different factors that were coming into play. What Filipinos look like. So there's no straight up Filipino look. What religion, a lot of them are Catholic, language again, and who Filipinos tended to hang out with, right? In LA, this is a city where 1 in every 2 people is Latino, right? It's different in the Bay, I know, but in LA, 1 in every 2 people is Latino. So when Filipinos are walking about their everyday lives, it's a very common experience for people to go up to them and say, start speaking to them in Spanish, right? Or to assume they're Latino. So folks have said, people assume that I'm Mexican. And then, even though they're miscategorizing them, what a lot of Filipinos in LA have done is turn this into an opportunity. Okay, maybe you see me as Mexican. That's not offensive at all. Here's an opportunity for me to think, oh, wow, we have this strong connection with this other group. In what ways can we use this connection to do really cool things in society? Again, last names, these are some typical Spanish last names. But in history, throughout history, Filipinos have used this connection with Latinos, Mexican Americans to do really amazing things. The food that you eat every single day is picked by farm workers who are probably not born in this country. And for a very long time, and even to some extent to this day, the people that pick your food tend to be underpaid. They tend not to have legal protections. They tend not to have health insurance. And there was, if you can imagine, there was a time in the early 20th century when conditions were even worse. And so what a Filipino farm worker by the name of Philip Veracruz did, Larry Itliong, and a Mexican-American farm worker by the name of, any guesses? Cesar Chavez. They were like, you know what? We have this shared experience of not only being farm workers, we also have this shared cultural experience as immigrants, people that share these cultural markers. Let's use this as an opportunity to get together and advocate for our civil rights, right? That was in the 1950s and 60s, but today, you know, you see this all over San Diego, Los Angeles, all over, you know, even New Jersey, New York, Chicago, where Filipinos are taking this opportunity, the fact that people don't see them as Asian, and they see them as something else, and say, let's see this as an opportunity to form connection, to form community, to build friendships. I was like asking people to guess which one of these do you think is Filipino? Person number 1, Filipino. Person number 2. Person number 3. The 3s, you got it. The third person's Filipino. You win, nothing, right? Okay, so. And of course, because culture matters, a lot of people have thought, hey, we've used these cultural markers to break down barriers when they've fallen in love. There's a long history of Filipinos intermarrying with Latinos. And what I'm trying to share here is that it's not that, you know, what you see between the Filipino and Latino community is not unique. All of us here have had, how many of you have had friends that are from a different ethnic or racial background? Right? Most everyone in this room, and that's a beautiful thing. And after you get through question. Okay, yeah. So, how many of you had friends that are of a different religion? Wow. You know? How many of you have friends that are from a different socioeconomic class? Right? You see the same thing going on in all of those situations of like, yes, maybe you don't belong to the same racial group, the same religious group, the same class background, but you know what? You're going to push through and you're going to take some time to learn something else that becomes the thing that bonds you, right? In some ways, their Cal Maritime experience is going to be that thing that bonds you to these people like no other thing in the world. And that's going to be a really amazing thing to see. Oh yeah, so I'm like, oh, what made you want to get with, to date? What made you, when I ask Filipinos about their dating life, sometimes they say things like, oh, it's okay because Mexicans are the same as Filipinos, right? Anyway, so why does this matter? Why does this matter to you? Because you're in college, right? In the same way Filipinos that don't get seen as Asian have to imagine different possibilities for their lives, cultural lives, you're doing the same thing here in college. You're imagining and you're embracing new possibilities. So this is where I teach at Cal Poly Pomona and down in LA. And we don't have a boat, sadly, like you do. But it's cool, I love it. I love this campus because you have a group that's as diverse as the group in this room. I'm going to go back to my cheat sheet because, again, I want to ask some questions that get to know you. And feel free to not answer if you don't want to. But how many of you are immigrants or come from an immigrant family? We can do the roll call thing. What did you call it? The primal scream. Okay, one more time. How many of y'all come from immigrants or come from an immigrant family? Okay. How many of you have a best friend that's an immigrant or from an immigrant family? How many of you grew up in a household where English was not the language being spoken? How many of you got family that are military? Veterans? Law enforcement? Okay. How many of you went to a school where most people looked like you? Now, opposite. How many of you went to school where most people didn't look like you? Couple more. I love this one. How many of you are the first person in your entire family to go to college? That one always gives me goosebumps. because y'all have gone through it, right? There was no one helping you with the college apps, like in the same way, like if your family went to college. Like, that's amazing. How many of you, first person to go to Cal Maritime? This one's a little sad. How many of you, for you, the first time living away from home? Okay, we got some yeahs and some not so happy people. All right, last couple ones. How many of you are here because you want to help your family in some way or help your community? How many of you here want to graduate and change lives? So, in a lot of ways, right? In a lot of ways, everything that you just talked about, in a lot of ways, everyone's experience here is very similar to the experience of an immigrant to this country, right? You're in a new place, you have to learn new rules, you take risks, but you're doing this with the belief that something much bigger than you is going to come out of it. Something much bigger than you is going to be helping your family, helping your community, leave your mark in society, right? The reason I do that thing where I ask people, about whether you came from immigrant family or different religion, people look like you, didn't look like you, etc., is because after this week, things are going to get very busy, right? And it's going to become very easy to fall back into the old ways of thinking stereotypically, thinking very one-dimensional. But I want you to remember, if anything in your head pops up about, when you see on TV or when you hear from, anywhere like about immigrants, you'll remember in this room, hey, there was a room full of people where some people were immigrants themselves, some had immigrant families, some people had best friends who are immigrants. So let me rethink what I'm hearing about immigrants. Hey, there are people in this room whose family are veterans, whose family are police officers. So when I hear something about veterans and police, let me rethink what I'm hearing, and let me try to run that by one of my friends here at this university. So in addition to that, what I'm trying to show you is that everyone here has a story, right? And there were a plethora of stories here. What's your story? Where did you start? And this could be a number of things, I wasn't the best student. I came from a different country. My parents were incarcerated. I came from a family that, it was like the Leave It to Beaver or the Brady Bunch, right? Where did you start? But more importantly, where do you want to go? So do me a favor. Let's take 1 minute or two and turn to the person next to you. And if you had to do this quick thing, like you're applying for a job, you're in an elevator, you got to convince someone to hire you. Do this thing of share with the person next to you these 3 questions. Actually, where did you start? Where are you from? And where do you want to go? So maybe it's just what neighborhood you're from and what do you want to be when you grow up. So let's do that. And if you haven't yet, switch to the other person. Switch to the other person. All right, if you can hear me, clap once. If you can hear me, clap twice. Okay, works every time, right? Paloma, can I borrow my fellow Eagle Rocker? Yeah. Who's the homegirl to the right of you? What's her name? Okay, Paloma, I want you to, what did you learn about Jacqueline in terms of where she's from, where she wants to go? If she doesn't mind sharing. Is it okay? Okay. First generation Bakersfield. Country. Okay. Where does Jacqueline want to do? She wants to go to the Navy. All right? So, Jacqueline, thank you. But now everyone's learned a story. We know Jacqueline. We know she's from Bakersfield. We know she likes country. And she wants to join the Navy. So what does this mean? Let's hear another one. Someone else, talk about their partner. Yeah.
This is Gage. He's from Fresno, and he's an MEP looking to go around ships for maybe
Awesome. Gage. You're the first person I've ever met named Gage. I will never forget that. Yeah. So, and you want to work on, you're from Fresno. Yeah. MET stands for what? School me on this. Okay, awesome. And yeah, marine educational technology. And then you want to work. Okay, ships, facilities. Okay. All right, can I get everyone back here again? So the reason I wanted to do this is because there's something really powerful in sharing where you came from and where you want to go. But there's something even more powerful when you say it out loud and when you ask someone next to you to talk about it for you. Here at Cal Maritime, the people sitting next to you, as well as the folks that are your support in the back, these are the folks that are going to be advocating for you. They're going to be your biggest cheerleaders. They're going to be the ones that you turn to when stuff's not going well for the rest of your life, right? And so you got to have each other's back in the same way that you do today. You got to know that no matter where people are coming from, whether it's the first in their family to go to college, whether they want to go into the military or not, whether they want to work internationally, everyone has something to bring to the table. And so the key is going to be telling those stories to each other, connecting like we just did right now. We have tons of opportunity for that. But the hardest one is listening, connecting, but doing this with empathy. Empathy is just a fancy word for imagining what is it like to be that person and them saying that thing, and being able to translate it to people beyond this university, right? So that's a hard thing. We live in a society where everything's moving so fast. You're constantly on your phones. You're trying to gather more likes on Insta. You're trying to snap everything as fast as possible. Are you allowed to have social media? Yeah, right? Okay, so yes, all those things. So it's a fast-paced world, and so what I would encourage people to do for this week is take a moment to pause, right? When you're going from this room to the next, when it's when programming for the day is over at like 9:45, 10 o'clock, take like a minute. Just take 1 minute to take inventory of how you got to this point, and appreciate where you're gonna go. So I want to talk about, the last thing I want to talk about before everyone kind of checks out, is I want to talk about some students of mine, fellow Cal State University students who were able to reimagine new possibilities for themselves. They were I always ask my students, are you the first whatever to go to college? Are you the first to graduate, etc.? And I asked them, how can you be the first in something else? If you weren't the first, how can you be the first? How can you blaze a trail for someone who's watching you somewhere else, hoping to get some inspiration? And okay, so now you answer these questions, now what? I want to talk about one of the first students I ever met at Cal Poly. I'm not going to give you his real name. This is not him. This is a stock photo from the internet. His name's Andres. And Andres grew up in Compton, California. Anyone from like South Bay? Long Beach? Okay. Compton, California, right? Most of us only know Compton, California from like Snoop and Dr. Dre songs, right? But this person actually grew up there and in a lot of ways had that experience that, was considered stereotypical. There was a lot of gang activity. This person's older brother, when he was 11 years old, his 15-year-old brother, who was not in a gang, who was, an artist, was killed at a Halloween party because of gang violence. You would think that would have scared him from joining a gang, but he ended up, because it was just the thing to do, he became part of a gang. Spent many years there, got kicked out of high school a number of times. And somehow he ended up in my classroom at Cal Poly Pomona, right? And the more I got to know him, I would talk to him about like, oh, what was high school like, et cetera. And I noticed that he would often hesitate to talk about his past, right? Which is understandable, right? No one when you're writing your college application, most people don't write, I used to be a gang member, and I dropped out of high school 3 times, et cetera, et cetera. But what was great about the context of where we're at is I was able to talk to him about, hey, you have this really unique experience. There are so many people out there who are in gangs, who are surrounded by gangs, who have absolutely no idea how to make their way out of this life, right? And so, more so than I can, you have this wisdom, you have this knowledge, that if you write this stuff down, people can read and people's lives can be changed. So this is what he did. He started doing research. He started researching the lives of Mexican-American youth that may be tempted to join gangs. He actually explored Mexican-American youth who like to embrace the indigenous sides of their identities. These people do the Aztec dance, they go to sweat lodges. And he found that part of the reason that he joined a gang was because when he turned on the TV and he saw people that looked like him, they are always criminals, gang members, etc. There were no examples or role models of people that were presidents, lawyers, doctors. And so for him, his only role models were these typecasts. And he wrote about that. And what's great is that he kept writing. He spent 2 years working on this research project. And now Homeboy is doing his PhD at the University of California. If you get to know me, this is like my thing. I love taking folks and like convincing them to get PhDs, right? Someone did that with me when I was a freshman. But I want to tell you last story before we break is what did I call it? Jaime, right? Not his real name. This is not him. Jaime was in my class, really smart kid, really, did anyone have to take statistics? Okay. So, who liked statistics? Okay. Who didn't like it? Okay, I teach statistics. All right? And every quarter, we're in the quarter system, I ask students, who after my class wants to pursue future upper division class in statistics? And I've taught this class 22 times, and every single time I ask this, nobody raises their hand. And I'm like, is it me? But except this one kid, Jaime. So this one kid, he just loved numbers. And he grew up, his parents were undocumented, right? And in a different class, we took a class where they had to do research on their own families. And then he wrote about this experience of growing up in a low-income neighborhood in LA, mostly immigrant. There were no grocery stores where he lived, just liquor stores. He grew up in a trailer park. And so when he got old enough, he started working at a grocery store because that type of food was not available, right? But he also noticed as a kid, because his parents were undocumented, whenever someone got hurt, what do you do when you get hurt really bad? You go to the hospital. They had this tremendous amount of fear going to the hospital because they weren't sure whether going to the hospital would lead to someone getting deported. And so they never went, even though they needed to. He talked about this moment where he was 5 years old and he fell off his skateboard and lacerated his forehead. And his mom, who obviously loved him, instead of taking him to the hospital, sewed up the wound herself. And I asked him, is your mom a nurse? And she's like, he was like, no, she's not a nurse, but when she lived in El Salvador, there was a war, and so she learned how to sew wounds up, because when her brothers would get wounded, she had to become the nurse. And I was just like, are you serious? Can you imagine like sewing up a 5-year-old kid's forehead on your own? And I told him, I was like, that's your story. That's a story of resilience. That's a story of empowerment. You know how many folks that are from your community could never imagine themselves finishing high school, let alone going to college, let alone thinking of what you want to do. He wanted to go get a doctorate degree, right? And so I was like, okay, cool, you want to get a doctorate degree, you need to have research experience. He's like, I don't have time because I work at the grocery store, a Latino grocery store. And I was like, maybe we'll make that your research experience. Because people care about health, right? Health is a big topic. Since you work at the grocery store, you know what Latinos are buying to eat, right? So that's what he did. He kept the journal, he wrote down the different things that Latino families and people would come to buy at the grocery store, and he wrote an entire paper about what Latinos eat in his neighborhood. He came to my office one day with this wad of receipts, and he literally coded, like, this is what they bought. It's a big occasion, so people like to buy meat on big occasions. He came up with this amazing story of Latino food habits, right? He used that essay, he submitted it to a lot of programs for summer research. He made his way to the University of Chicago, full ride. He didn't pay a single cent. Went to Chicago, got the research experience he needed. The following fall, he applies to grad school. And then a couple months later, every week he'd come to my office. Dr. Ocampo, I got into UC San Diego. Dr. Ocampo, I got into UCLA. Dr. Ocampo, I got into Columbia. And in the moment where I was like, okay, we need to take this moment in. Dr. Ocampo, this kid, worked at a grocery store for most of his high school and college life. Dr. Ocampo, I got into Harvard. And I was like, damn, it still gives me chills to hear that story. You know? My point is, if you tap into who you are, and you think about the way society can learn from your story, there is so much possibility there. There is nothing telling a Latino kid who grew up poor, that lived in a trailer park, that you're going to be going to Harvard. But something about digging really deep and learning about his own story, he was able to use that, not as a way to get people to feel sorry for him. He was able to use the experience as say, hey, my experience has something to teach the world that the world doesn't know about yet. And so that's what I'm going to ask everyone here to do. Not literally right now, but over the course of the next couple years. Think about what's your story and what can people learn from my story? And how can I learn from other people's story? My last bit of advice would be, it's not a race. Everyone here is running your own race, right? There are going to be moments. Actually, let me borrow my cheat sheet again. I wrote this down. Oops. Yeah. You're going to struggle. Some people here may feel it already, even if they're not talking about it. You're going to fail at different moments. Maybe not fail a class, but you're going to fail maybe as a friend. You're going to fail in your performance in class one day maybe. You're going to make a mistake, probably several. Those are things that are going to make you feel alone, right, and vulnerable. What I'm going to ask you to do is to push beyond that and know that everyone is going through the same thing, right? People always talk about struggle and failure as if those are examples of not being strong. And what I want to say is being open about struggle and failure sometimes is what you need to do to actually become strong, right? Failure you can think of as something we all experience. I have a stack of rejection letters from all different times in my life that can prove that. But what I've come to learn is failure is the thing that forces you to take a step back, dig a little bit deeper, and figure out, what am I really all about? Did I really want this? And what I found, what I always like to tell my students now, is failure isn't a setback. Failure and struggle is a prerequisite to your future greatness. Failure and struggle is a prerequisite. It's par for the course of your future greatness. So with that, thanks for clapping. I just want to stop there. I want to thank you. I know it's not easy. It's like morning. with a lot of programming. It's not easy to sit here and listen, but I want to thank everybody for being present and participating. And I just can't wait to get the random emails or tweets to hear about all the cool stuff that's going on from today onto your day of graduation. So again, thank you very much, and I'm happy to take any questions that you may have.
Thank you again.
Sorry.
He's doing it. Do you see that? Thank you again, Dr. Ocampo, for sharing your story and for reminding us that we're all come with a story, and that story for a lot of you guys here is taking on a new dimension today and a new chapter. And that story includes a lot of profundity, who we are, where we come from, who our ancestors are. Are we an East Coast rap versus West Coast rap? So, you know, it's got a lot of different dimensions to it. So we're going to take a few minutes to engage in a discussion. And once again, if you have a question for Dr. Ocampo, if you wouldn't mind jotting it down and passing it to one of the student leaders in the room who are passing through the halls so that they can submit it to the stage here.
Thank you.
Joining Dr. Ocampo on stage now will be Mel Orpia. Mel Orpia was born and raised in Vallejo. He comes from a pioneer Vallejo Filipino family that has been in America since 1926. He attended Vallejo Public Schools and attended Solano Community College, Sac State, and San Francisco State Universities, earning degrees in journalism and ethnic studies. He is the author of Filipinos in Vallejo and has had many articles published in various magazines and newspapers on the topics of Filipinos in America. He's a master in the ancient fighting style of arnis, of Filipino martial art that he teaches at his school, Island Warriors Martial Arts, so for those of you who are looking for an activity. He is a Bay Area chapter president of the Mark of Four Waves traditional Filipino tattoo tribe. He volunteers on many boards and organizations, including Cal Maritime's Cadet Community Connections Program, the Filipino-American National Historical Society, Rebuilding Together Solano County, Touro University Advisory Board, and the Vallejo Waterfront Weekend. He works full-time as the Senior District Representative for U.S. Congressman Mike Thompson. So please join us on stage, Mel Orpia.
Good morning. I know you've been up since about, what, 5:30 this morning? Five. Okay. Why don't everyone just stand up and take a stretch and take a couple of deep breaths. There you go. Twist your back around. There you go. Stretch your arms. Don't forget those deep breaths. And while you're doing that, I want to invite our mayor, Bob Sampayan, back up to the stage, and our council member, Dr. Rosanna Verdura-Liga. Yes, I said doctor. She has a doctorate degree in family counseling psychology, and she's the manager of the Solano County Children's Mental Health Services. Feel better? All right. Yeah, I'm a physical fitness nut, and I hate to sit down any more than 30 minutes at a time. I got to get up and stretch. So let's give it up one more time for Dr. Ocampo and that great presentation. A lot of what he talked about brought me back more than 35 years when I first went to college. It's been that long since I've been in college. But as you heard, I was born and raised here in Vallejo to a pioneer Vallejo Filipino family. And growing up in Vallejo, I really did not know what it meant to be a Filipino. I grew up in a predominantly African-American community, neighborhood, in a white part of town. And most of my friends were African-American, and I had very few Filipino friends because I lived on the east side, and all the Filipinos lived in the south side. So we went to different schools. But when I grew up in Vallejo, you know, being a Filipino meant just being brown. It was about the color of our skin, not our culture or our ethnicity. So I hung around in high school with a lot of Guamanians and Hawaiians and other second and even third generation Filipinos. And this was in the early 70s when it was just at the beginning of Filipino immigrants coming to the United States and Filipino young people coming to the United States who we referred to as FOBs. Remember that term? Fresh off the Boeing, or immigrant Filipino kids. And this is when we started forming Filipino gangs based on where we were born. So I was part of the ABC gangs, American-born children, and who did we fight against, or who we were up against was the FOBs. And it was a horrible time because we were brothers, and we didn't even know that. And it's because we did not know our common history. I graduated from high school barely with a 1.2 grade point average. I graduated as a teen father with a juvenile record, not knowing what I was going to do with my life. Luckily, I was able to go to community college at the urging of my sister. And back then, community colleges in California were completely free. And at community college, I had a great mentor named Alma Hollandseed, a Filipino woman, married to a Caucasian, but she was also American-born, also a teen mother, and had a master's degree. And she really inspired me to go on to a real college. And I went to Cal State University, Sacramento for 9 years. And then I transferred to San Francisco State, where I did my graduate work in ethnic studies. And it was from that point on that I started doing lectures in the community called No History, No Self, No History, No Self. The first No History is spelled N-O, No History, No Self. And the second No History, No Self is spelled K-N-O-W. So for me, knowing my history helped me to understand who I was, not only as a Filipino, but as a person. And the more I learned about my own history, the more I saw the connections between other cultural groups. Like I said, I was raised in the African American community. I saw the relationships and the historical and cultural connections between me and my African American neighbors, mainly the slave trade. Filipinos were brought to the United States in the 1500s aboard Spanish galleons as the slaves that ran these ships. The Spanish galleon period was from 1565 till 1815. And matter of fact, the first recorded landing of a Filipino in the United States happened on October 18, 1587 in Morro Bay, California. And that's why we celebrate October as Filipino-American History Month. I point that out because Filipinos have always been a seafaring people because we come from an island nation. And I'm proud that we have some Filipinos in this class because you're just carrying on a tradition that has gone on for hundreds, if not thousands of years. Also, I just want to point out that you're coming to this community called Vallejo, and the mayor pointed out earlier that this is one of the most diverse cities in the whole country. We have almost equal numbers of Asians, primarily Filipinos, Caucasians, African Americans, and Latinos. And as someone who was born and raised here in Vallejo, I want to welcome you wholeheartedly to the city that I've lived in and that I love with all my heart. And that's why I'm so involved in the community here. And there's a lot of activities going on in Vallejo that hopefully you'll leave this campus, the safety of this campus, and come out into our community. Forget all the stereotypes you've heard about Vallejo being a dangerous place. Vallejo is a great place to explore your culture, to explore other cultures, to explore the world, because we have restaurants from almost every culture here. You don't need to go to Thailand or to Guam to taste Guamanian food. We have it right here in town, in addition to some of the best Filipino restaurants that you'll find anywhere. So I just want to start that out so you have a context of who I am and where I came from and what I've been doing to spread and the understanding of not only my own history and culture, but other people's histories and culture. So far I only have one question card here. And well, now I have a few more. So I brought up my colleagues, in addition to Dr. Ocampo, I brought up the mayor and I brought up Dr. Rosanna Verdura-Liga because they also have had very diverse experiences as Filipinos here in the United States. I don't know what it's like to be an immigrant. Dr. Rosanna does. I don't know what it was like growing up in the 50s. Mayor Bob does. He's a little older than me. Just a little bit. So you can direct any of your questions or even comments to any of the four of us. And I'll start with this first question that I received. And it says, when I was engaged to a Filipino man, his family rejected us because we were gay. Is this mentality common in the Filipino community? And I'll ask Dr. Ocampo that question.
That's quite the first question.
That's the first question.
You know, I don't know if people inferred it from my biography, but my partner is male. And, you know, it's being the only child in an immigrant family. Kind of, what would I say? Dropped the bomb? When I told my parents about who I really was. And what's funny is that you can say these things and you could share all the data about, like, you know, society's more accepting, the level of happiness of children raised by same-sex parents is exactly the same. Kids of same-sex parents end up being pretty woke, you know, politically. It's kind of cool. And it didn't matter. You know, when I told my mom and dad, I was going up against their dreams of having a wife and grandkids, and that wasn't my reality. And I had to honor the fact that they had to go through their mourning process as well. When immigrants come to this country and they work those long hours and they're underpaid and people treat them not so great, what powered my mom and dad through those tough times were the dreams that they had for me, which for them included marrying someone and then having kids in exactly the same way they imagined. And I had to respect the fact that that was their dream and give them time to understand that what I dream for my own life and what they can dream, the new possibility they can imagine, there's some overlap there. So now, my partner, Filipino as well, I wouldn't have believed it 10 years ago, but we live with my mom and dad, you know? My mom and dad were not very accepting in the beginning, but when my partner's mother passed away in December, they were there in the ICU every single day. They brought food. They were there consoling him and his siblings. And so you realize, again, when you take the time to unfreeze your stereotypes a little bit, there's a lot of shared humanity there that become the new building blocks for a future relationship.
Excellent answer. And what you'll find about the Filipino community is that we are a very accepting and loving community after we get through some of those biases. And we do have biases, whether conscious or unconscious, not just towards different sexual orientation groups, but also against other races. And that's unfortunate, but I think we're getting through that, especially here in Vallejo.
Yeah. So can I say one more thing?
Sure.
Sorry, and not to monopolize, but you know, when I became a professor, I had a conversation with myself about, like, am I going to talk about that part of my identity from the get, or am I going to let people figure it out? And I thought, you know what, I'm going to say it on day one of class every single time I teach a class, because even if people hold not so great views or stereotypes, they're stuck with me for another 10 weeks. So they're going to have to reshift their mentality about what they think this is. So yeah, I like kind of breaking stereotypes, and I think everyone can relate to the idea that you getting boxed in and wanting to be something that's beyond whatever that box says you are. So.
All right, here's another question. What are some Filipino traditions that are still practiced today that you are trying not to lose? You talked about the Filipino language being influenced by Spanish. Is it also influenced by other languages? And this is for Bob or Dr. Rosanna.
That's an excellent question, because one of the things that Filipinos are known for is family value. And we are a close-knit community. We believe in family. We believe in who we are. And if you come to a Filipino gathering, Just within the past few months, I lost my cousin to cancer, and we were very close. And as she was on the decline, we as a family came together literally every day for several months until she passed. And at her service, there were probably well over 300 people that showed up to bid her farewell. Family is huge in our community. Family values are huge. Raising children, an education. As I look and see of faces out here, I do see a lot of Asian Americans. And it is that ideal of wanting to do what is best for you and your family that is very important to this community. Other areas that we are very, very excited about is celebrating our culture, our heritage, because we are very proud of our heritage. One of the things that Mel has done over the years is he's chronicled the Filipino community. He is our local Filipino historian, and he's chronicled where our community has gone. And if you look at our very early beginnings, which were very humble, to where we are now, we are really moving this community forward. Filipino community is huge. And as I said before, it is now taken over a political role in our community. Dr. Verderaliga has been on council for 4 years, and she is doing a magnificent job in representing our town. We have 2 other Filipino members of City Council. Council Member Hermie Sunga, who is now on his 3rd term, as well as Council Member Jess Malgapa, who is on his 2nd term. And again, it is this empowerment that is so exciting for the Filipino community. So I hope that answers your question.
Some of the other traditions that I'm trying to preserve in my own life are the Filipino martial arts. Because the Philippines was a tribal society and it was an island nation, 7,100 different islands, we were always susceptible to invasion or attack from within and from outside. And so from an early age, Filipino boys and girls had to learn how to protect themselves. And a lot of people don't realize that we have had our own Filipino martial arts, mainly blade-based or weapon-based, but now we practice with sticks to make it a little safer. You've probably seen some of our martial arts in movies like Bruce Lee movies, Enter the Dragon. Whenever you see a martial artist or an actor using sticks or blades, chances are that it was a Filipino martial arts choreographer who was on the set teaching those moves. All the Born Identity movies, Book of Eli with Denzel Washington. So a lot of movies utilize our Filipino martial arts, and I felt that it was important for me to carry on those traditions because a lot of Filipinos themselves had no idea we had Filipino martial arts, and I just did not want those traditions to die. And the other thing related to traditional Filipino practices is Filipino traditional tattoos, primarily warrior tattoos. And in the warrior tattoo tradition, you'll see a lot of similarities between our tattoos and Samoan tattoos, Hawaiian tattoos, Tahitian tattoos, Maori tattoos. And a lot of the words that we use to describe the patterns on our skin are similar because these cultures had been visiting each other's islands for thousands of years, sharing their culture, sharing their tradition, sharing their traditional tattoo patterns and their language. So those are just 2 other things that we did to share.
Thank you, Mel. I just wanted to piggyback on what Mayor Bob Sampayan mentioned about the one family tradition and practice is family. And just an example, I'm an immigrant. I've been in Vallejo, though, for 36 years. I moved to Vallejo because I fell in love. And so you can blame my husband because that's why I came to America. I met him in the Philippines during his vacation, and the rest is history. We've been married almost 37 years. And I have... Thank you, and that's really a true love, right? So we have 3 adult sons. My oldest son went to Davis, UC Davis. Second son went to San Jose State, and my youngest son is a sophomore at UC Santa Cruz. So we have an empty nest, actually. But my son, who lives down the street, actually comes to our house to eat dinner. And we welcome that very much. But one tradition that helped me as a working woman and as a professional woman, as an immigrant to this country, is my parents helped me babysit my kids. And it's actually very common among Filipino families to have a lola and their lolo, and this is grandmother and grandfather, live with them to take care of the kids. And I think it's not just unique to the Filipino family, but many Latino families and Asian families, even Indian American, East Indian families have their grandparents live with them. So I'm not expecting that of my kids, but if and when the time comes when I become a grandmother, I'd be willing to babysit their kids when we're not on vacation someplace else. But that is something so unique to the Filipino family, is the grandparents live with them at home to help with the kids. And so I think it may be true for some of for Dr. Ocampo as well.
And as you can see, one of the most important Filipino traditions is strong Filipino women. So.
Okay, next question. Do you think the differences between cultures is what creates more division rather than race? I mean, culture as in economic classes, urban or rural living, and moral codes.
You know, that's a really challenging question. That's a great question. Sometimes people think that when you don't talk about differences, they'll magically go away, right? And I can see where people are coming from with that, right? The issue with that is the way our society is set up is that you need people to be able to identify how they do, because otherwise folks would know nothing about their experiences. We would not be able to get a sense of whether one group is being marginalized or discriminated or not, right? It was amazing to me to see people say they saw Filipinos on TV, because when I was growing up, back in the 80s, right? But when I was growing up, there was nothing. And so I had a choice. We could not talk about it, which meant that I would remain invisible, or we could talk about it and people would, it may be a little odd for some folks that are new to it, but at least it becomes the building blocks for stuff later. What's great about the YouTube generation and all y'all on Instagram and stuff is you play a direct role in creating and defining what it means to be rural versus urban, what it means to be black versus white, what it means, like, that is in your hands because you have this amazing thing called social media. And so I love it when they're not mutually exclusive. You can have these categories, but you can work really darn hard to change what those categories mean and try to find the connections between those categories as opposed to using them to divide. I do think there are people that use them to divide. Don't get me wrong. But if you can be a little bit louder and see how we can find connection across difference, that's a pretty damn important skill.
Yeah, I do believe that there is only one race, and that's the human race. And I think the exercises and the questions that Dr. Ocampo asked you today goes in that direction. It helps you find those connections and find that common ground that we all have with everybody in this room. We all bleed the same color, and that's red. We're all human beings. We all come from the same root somewhere back in millennia. We're not as different as you think we are because of the color of our skin, where we were born, how much money our parents have, or what car we drive. None of that matters. We all have a lot that we can learn from each other, and I think today is a great beginning on that journey. Might have time for one more question. Oh, this is an interesting one. Why do highly educated Filipinos with Latino surnames make fun or bully Filipinos with traditional surnames? And let me preface that by explaining why Filipinos have Spanish surnames. When Spain conquered the Philippines in 1565, they needed a way to keep records of Filipino Indios, which they called us at that time. We were called Indios, like the Indians Columbus had found in America. And they needed a way to keep records of us so they can tax us, which would support the Spanish colonial government in the Philippines, which was run through the Catholic Church. So they gave Filipino Indios Spanish last names alphabetically and geographically. So a lot of Filipinos can tell where your family's from in the Philippines just by the first letter of your last name. Interesting. And the Filipinos that have the traditional Filipino last names like Sampayan, or even Aliga, or Batong Bakal, or some of these other very deep Filipino names, these were families that belonged to the ruling class because the Spanish authorities knew that they needed these ruling class families to help them suppress and control the Indios. So they gave them special privileges, including allowing them to keep their land, but more importantly, allowing them to keep their ancestral last names. So that's where that comes from. So going back to the question, why do highly educated Filipinos with Latino surnames make fun or bully Filipinos with traditional surnames?
Frankly, I don't think that happens.
It could be anecdotal experience from some folks, but I've never had that experience. So when I was growing up in the Philippines, because of the colonial mentality, and this is how I can answer that, because of the colonial mentality, you know, if you have Spanish surnames or Caucasian surnames, you kind of feel like you're much better than folks. But that's the mentality. But that's not how I thought of my friends who had different surnames than mine. And it's really the mentality that, again, as Filipinos in the Philippines, still actually struggle because the colonial mentality still is still exists. And that's another lecture, lecture material in the future. But yes, there's still that issue with colonial mentality in the Philippines, and that actually has hindered the progress of the Philippines as a nation. And that's another topic, but I won't touch on that, and I'll have Dr. Ocampo
Yeah, I think
respond to the question.
it's an interesting question. The underlying point I see is this thing of like, what responsibility do you have when you get an education, right? And I would say never let the fact that you're getting a degree get in the way of your education. You know, we are here because we have resources, we had support, and there are folks out there who will never make it here that didn't have those moments. But you know, never let your education be something that can allow you to feel divided from other people, whether they have less education than you or more, because you have everyone has something to bring to the table.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question, and this is going to be for Dr. Ocampo. And it says, as a Filipino, when I am called Mexican or Latino, I get offended. Why have you chosen to call us Latinos?
That's a great question. I think when anyone is called something they're not, there's the risk of getting offended, right? Because that's not how you identify. What I think might also come into play is that when you think about stereotypes about different groups, stereotypes have a tendency to sound negative. So if you ever get called something that you're not, and it bothers you, take it as an opportunity to think, what about this actually bothers me? Is it the fact that someone just kind of switched it up? Or is there some negative impression that I've heard about this label that's been used that I can start to question, start to be critical of? Because, you know, when I hear Mexican or Latino, the stories that I think about are the stories of my students, where I think resilience, hardworking, people that have made their way in society even when society wasn't trying to make the way for them. So all labels can have, they all have positive and negative connotations. It's just, for me, the key is to focus on the positive.
Do we have time for one more? One more, okay. With all the stereotypes in the world, do you often find it difficult to break certain stereotypes? Do you feel obligated to inform or educate people who you hear the stereotypes coming from? Well, I thought Bob would want that.
Absolutely. I'm the first person in my family to become a law enforcement officer. I spent close to 34, 35 years as a police officer. The stereotype when I was growing up back in the 50s and 60s was that Filipino children raised in America become doctors, lawyers, dentists. As a matter of fact, my parents were absolutely livid when I decided that I was not going to apply to dental school. When all the paperwork came, I'm looking at it. Now, this isn't really what I want to do. Back in the very early 70s, I rode with a buddy of mine who became a police officer in my hometown of Salinas. And I went, wow, this is kind of cool. I really like this. I applied for the job, and I was hired. And it was just amazing that, wow, it's a Filipino police officer. Look how little he is. That's number one. Wow, we have a bench seat in the front of the police car. And my partner was a fellow who was about 6'4". Wow, he's going to ride with his knees in the middle of his chin. So really, can this guy be a police officer? That's one of the stereotypes. Another stereotype, and Dr. Ocampo spoke of this, he went to Stanford University. I worked for the Palo Alto Police Department for 12 years before I came to Vallejo. I increased the Filipino population of Palo Alto 100% by moving into that community. When my wife and I bought our home, and I'll never forget the day, I looked up and down the street, and it was, wow, not very diverse. Guess what kind of car I drove? I drove a pickup truck. And here I pull into the driveway of my new Palo Alto home in my pickup truck. It was, oh no, it's one of those. I had a neighbor tell my stepdaughter, really, that's your stepdad's car? And he's going to park it here in our neighborhood? Again, stereotyping. Stereotyping us because of the food we eat, the way we talk. Filipinos have accents. Hispanics have accents. African Americans have accents. A lot of people have, Americans have accents from all over the country. We have East Coast accents, we have Southern accents, Northern accents, California accents. Yeah is right, thank you. So yeah, stereotyping. And quite frankly, it goes back to that question earlier on. It's about who we are, and it's about being able to say to a person that we're not familiar with, what are you about? You know, just very, very quick, because I know we're running out of time. I worked homicide for a lot of years, and one of my investigations took me to Georgia. Took me to southern Georgia, a place called Albany, Georgia. Albany, Georgia. And you would know, right? Yeah, you've heard it. Okay. And when I arrived there, along with my partner, to begin this investigation, it was a triple homicide. And we had to go see the sheriff of the county before we could, quote, do police work. And we drove up to this house, and it was a huge, huge house. It had a veranda out front, and there was a gentleman in a white suit sitting out front of the house. And as we walked up, we were ushered up to the veranda, and the first question I was asked was, Boy, what are you? You ain't no Mexican. But you're colored. What are you? And when I said I'm Filipino, I got this look of, okay, where is that? What is that? And I said, well, Sheriff, you know where the Hawaiian Islands are, right? And he goes, well, yes, sir. And I said, okay, we're just kind of a little bit west of that. Guam, Philippines, Hawaiian Islands. Again, stereotyping. So I hope that answers that question.
Thank you, Bob. I think that's it for our time with our panel here. Let's give everyone on the panel a round of applause. And we'll stick around after the program and answer any more questions. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Ian Wallace to close up the program.
Thank you, Mel. Let me just make some final thank yous and wrap up here and kind of move on with the day. First, just let's give another quick round of applause. Thank you to all of our guests, Dr. Ocampo in particular, a wonderful educational, personal experience throughout today. But events like these, including this one, can't happen alone, and there's so many people to thank. I'll just go through briefly. The President's Office, the Orientation Committee, the funding and the support, the logistics to be here to incorporate this. We value that highly. We think this is invaluable and look forward to each incoming class having experiences like this. So thank you very much. The Unity Council members, and again, I'm the chair of the Unity Council. That's why I'm speaking right now, and I'm pleased to thank, starting with Dr. Frank Yip as our MC today. Sharon Culpepper has been invaluable. Fatima Rios, one of our newest members, and others on the Unity Council have been invaluable as well in preparing this event and future ones. And with that said, I hope you get involved. The postcards you receive, the information here, events like this, partnering with the Latino Club, Andres Romero, partnering with the Asian Pacific Islander Club, Yatan. We're very happy to have their support as co-presidents of their respective organizations and others, including the Black Student Union and others. Just more briefly, again, Mel Orpia, Mayor Sampayan, Dr. Verder Liga, can't thank you enough for being here and being part of this. I want to pass this, Mayor, if you could deliver this to Dr. Ocampo.
Dr. Ocampo, thank you. Veterans and families, can you put your hands up for a moment? Thank you. We're presenting Dr. Ocampo with a t-shirt that says Vallejo, California, Purple Heart City. Now, how many of you here know that Cal Maritime is the first public university that's been designated a Purple Heart University on the West Coast? Okay, the very first Purple Heart University on the West Coast is Cal Maritime. Thanks to Admiral Cropper and to Captain Arp.
Thank you.
And for those veterans, you know what Purple Heart is for. What is Purple Heart for? What's the medal for? Yes. Okay, close enough. Purple Heart Medal is for the folks that was wounded in action or killed in action. And as you know, there was a class of Cal Maritime that during World War II, half of the class was killed in action. So that's why, yes, that's why you're a Purple Heart University.
Thank you, Nelson. And lastly, on behalf of the Unity Council at Cal Maritime, I'm happy to present a Cal Maritime Challenge coin, a U.S. tradition, military history here, specific to Cal Maritime. It symbolizes and represents overcoming a challenge and recognizing the effort given to the community in support of that effort and a membership as well. Thank you. Yes. So I'll just give you some housekeeping things and we'll be on our way. The MPM company, you'll be headed on your way to Mayo Hall. The deck company, you'll be in the Compass Room, which is in the dining center. And engine company, please stay here. Thank you again for your attention. Have a great rest of the day.